Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special event. How can I start to say that it's my greatest pleasure and honor tonight to welcome Dacia Maraini here at Seton Hall and to introduce her to you. She's one of Italy's most remarkable writers for both her commitment to writing literature, but also to narrating the life of women. Dacia Maraini is the author of, honestly, I tried to count them, and then I stopped at 50, 60, it kept on, and I said, all right, we can number them. But she's the author of many, many volumes of novels, poetry, essays, plays, short stories, and books for children. She has received many prestigious literary prizes in Italy, among which the Campiello Prize, the Strega Prize, and was nominated for the Nobel Literary Prize. Translated in all major languages, she's recognized internationally as one of the main literary voices of Italy. Among her books translated into English, the latest one that came up with Rutgers University Press, Life, Brazen and Garish, A Tale of Three Women, 2024. In Praise of Disobedience, Claire of Assisi, 2023. Darkness, 2002. The Silent Duchess, 2000, which I think was the book for a book club here not long ago. She's been a champion for women's rights and human rights. Converging into her narrative, collective history, along with individual stories. And I think this is really what makes Dacia Maraini's writing extremely powerful, how she weaves together the historical time with the life of people who find themselves in that specific time of history. And in this light, I think I'd like to present her book tonight, which has not been translated. It's in our library upstairs, which I'm going to return tonight. Anyone interested in reading will find it on our shelves upstairs. It's called Vita Mia, My Life. Memories of an Italian child in a prisoner's camp. My understanding, it has been translated, but it has not come out yet, and it will soon be published. Some of my students have translated some excerpts from this book, and so I will call them to come to the table to give just a sample, a taste. And I'm very proud of them. They did a tremendous job in, so send it to me and I'm going to check errors. It was almost perfect. So really, I see a future there actually as translators. But before we sit down and begin our conversation with Dacia Maraini, I would like to thank the co-sponsors of this event tonight. The Catholic Studies Program, and in particular, Ines Marzucco, Professor Marzucco, I'm not sure she's here. I don't see her. And also the History Department, and in particular, Professor Matusevich, the chair of the department, who is here. I want to acknowledge, thank you so much for your sponsorship. And a special thanks, of course, goes to Professor Gilbin Gedacht, who's going to be sitting here with us, and a specialist on Japan, and who kindly accepted my invitation to have a conversation with Dacia Maraini. Finally, before we get into the substance of the evening, I would like to call to the podium Provost Passerini, who might want to give some welcoming remarks.
Thank you. And welcome with the Seton Hall Blue. We're delighted about that, Professoressa Maraini. So there are times when you meet women who change the world, they change generations, the heroines, and you find them in books, you find them in movies, you find them in schools, in hospitals, in poems, and you know that they're there to tell stories, or stories are going to be told about them. And these stories are so big that change the world. And we have such a woman with us tonight, la dottoressa Dacia Maraini. Even the name, Dacia Maraini, even the name sounds poetic. And so is her life. Deep, adventurous, light, and profound. Dacia loves writing, as you can see from her prolific career. And yesterday we had a few minutes together, and she was sharing her passion for writing. She simply wakes up, starts writing, then has lunch, reads some newspapers, Italian newspapers, get upset a little bit, and then go on, and then goes back to writing, day in, day out. And then she writes again and again, to master an art that she has already mastered, and to continue to enhance a story that is already exceptional and phenomenal. So in front of this, I really don't know how to introduce a woman like Dacia Maraini, so I decided to use the word of another phenomenal woman. So bear with me a little bit. This is Maya Angelou. Pretty women wonder where my secret lies. I'm not cute or built to suit a fashion model size. But when I start to tell them, they think I'm telling lies. I say, it's the reach of my arms, the span of my hips, the stride of my step, the curl of my lips. I'm a woman, phenomenal woman, that's me. I walk into a room just as cool as you please, and to a man, the fellows stand or fall down on their knees. Then they swarm around me, a hive of honeybees. I say, it's the fire in my eyes and the flash of my teeth, the swing of my waist and the joy in my feet. I am a woman, phenomenal woman, and that, ladies and gentlemen, it's Dacia Maraini. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Passerini, with this beautiful, inspiring, and poetic introduction. So let's go into the substance of our conversation tonight. I also would like to read something before we begin, and that is my translation of the epigraph of the book. So these are Dacia's words at the beginning of her book. "O life, you come to me, run down, tormented, pounded, wanting to leave without saying goodbye, with one foot ahead and one behind. O life, you dance and sing on the ruins of the past, but before letting you go, let me understand you, let me conceive you, let me embrace you, let me narrate you." And the book narrates a very specific moment in Dacia Maraini's life, and that was the life as a child from age 1 to age 7 or 8, when she lived in Japan. Now, I'm just going to give a very short introduction of the historic time for the students who are not maybe familiar with that. But Italy entered World War II under Mussolini regime, a disastrous idea, thinking that it would be a very fast and victorious war, and allied with Germany. Dacia's family, her father was an anthropologist, and he applied for a scholarship to study in Japan. So he moved the whole family, his wife, and Dacia, to Japan, and they lived there from 1939 to 1946. During those years, the first very happy years, I understand, in Kyoto, 2 other siblings were born, and everything was going really well, integrated into the Japanese culture, into Japanese life, until in 1943, Japan entered the Axis, and Italy switched alliance from the German. They were allied to the United States. And all of a sudden, Italy was enemy for Germany and Japan. And there were concentration camps in Japan where the whole Maraini family was asked to go. They stayed in the concentration camp until the end of the war, and they were very difficult years. So the book is about that, but not only, and we'll explore the different aspects, the different facets of these memories that Dacia captured in this book that came out in Italy last year in 2023. So my first question, I guess, Dacia, is, so you talk about your childhood in Japan, in specifically for the years 1943, 1945, while you were in the concentration camp. Why now? Why in 2023 and not, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or other times in your life?
Okay, thank you. Good evening to everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I started many times to write this book because I wanted to tell about my experience, which has been very, very hard and painful. But I couldn't. So it was like, opening a wound. But this time, 2 years ago, I started to think that things are changing, that there is a danger of war. I think that everybody knows in this moment we are really near a danger of a third world war. So I said I have to write, to finish this book. And because, we are all against the war. We can speak about the war. But if you give an experience that you have lived with your own body, and maybe you can understand more about what could be a war for a child. And so I forced myself to finish this book. By the way, what was strange for me is that while I was writing this book, I understood that it was a good thing for me because it took some distance from these horrible things that I tried to forget, but they were still there. And then another thing important is that I understood that many memories, things that I had forgotten, they came out while I was writing. So it had been for me very important because, Freud says, everybody knows that Freud says that you mustn't never stop your mind to remember, because memory is very important, but memory must be fluid, must go on like a river. You can't stop because you become ill, no? This is an idea of psychology, but I think it's very right. And so for me, it has been very useful, very important to go on with the book. So now I'm happy to have finished and written this book.
Thank you. I unfortunately am not able to read Italian, but I also can't work technology. Stay. Okay. I think it's interesting, Dr. Romani starts off with this discussion of the historical context, and that's kind of my jam. And so, Japan had been in war really since 1931. It had been in a hot war with Asia since 1937. So by the time you and your family moved over there, Japan was already in the throes of war. And really, it was a total war in Japan. Not so much that everyone was on board. I think this is often a misunderstanding people have about Japan. When they look at the war in Europe, they may say they're the difference between the good Germans versus the Nazis, but the Japanese were always seen as one people. I thought it was really interesting that the book has already been translated in Japan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Into Japanese. I was kind of curious. The Japanese have a significant war memory problem. It's not taught about as widely among students in Japan, and not as many Japanese learn about it. I was wondering how the reception has been in Japan to these incredibly important things, as you say, as we're hitting a new global space which is so filled with tension.
Well, first of all, I have to remember that my father went to Japan because he won a scholarship, international scholarship. It was not a Japanese scholarship. It was an international scholarship to study a population of Japan, of the North Japan, which is called Ainu. And they are very, very small population, which are now finishing, despairing, come si dice, sparendo. And so when he went there, and he was young and he didn't have any work, so for him it was a very important thing to go there. And but when we stayed the first years in Japan, we were absolutely in wonderful terms with the Japanese people. I felt that I was a little Japanese girl. I mean, I was speaking Japanese, eating Japanese, dressed in Japanese. So we were not tourists. We were absolutely inside the Japanese society. And they were so nice with us. I mean, they thought that we were friends. We had all our friends were Japanese. So when in 1943, the police came at the house and said, you have to sign the agreement to the fascist regime in Italy, which my father never did when he was in Japan, when he was in Italy. And you know, in Italy, in those days, in the fascist regime, if you didn't have the card of, come si dice, una tessera, the card of membership of the fascist party, you couldn't work, you couldn't study, you couldn't have a house. It was very, very heavy. So when the police came and said, you have to sign, he said no. And also my mother, who, you know, she always told me, you have to tell that I didn't sign, not because of your father, but because I decide. Because the police came and said, well, you are a mother, you have 3 children. You know, my sister was 2 years old. And they said, so you will sign. And she said, no. And they was very surprised. And they said, well, what do you want to do with your children? Why don't you bring them to Italy? So they have a family that can take care of them. And she said, and they said, no, we won't do it. If you want, we can put your children in a orphanage, come si dice, orfanatrofio?
Orphanage.
Orphanage, Japanese orphanage. Well, my mother, I think she had, I don't know, but an idea which saved us, because she said, no, if we have to die, we will die together, okay? Well, you know that during the war, the orphanage have been bombed and all the children died, you see? So in a way, I wouldn't be here. Well, the concentration camp was not extermination, un campo di sterminio, but in a way they were exterminating with hunger, because you had 20 grams of rice and nothing else. No meat, no fish, no fruit, no vegetables, absolutely nothing. So, you know, after a certain time, your body starts to become weak, and then illness. We had beriberi, scorvio, non so come si dice, scorbuto in inglese. Anyway, there are illness that come from the lack of vitamins and proteins. and we were becoming thin and more thin and more thin. Then you lose your hair, then you lose your teeth, then you don't see any well with the eyes. Then at a certain moment, my mother was paralyzed with the legs. She couldn't walk, for example. Well, and naturally, this was the worst thing, hunger. Then there were the bombs, because there were not only hunger, but bombs every day. So we had to jump in a sort of hole that we found on the ground, and there we stayed. And at a certain moment, the house went down, so they brought us in another place in the country. Well, you know, for example, they would say every morning when they were counting us, we were only 18 persons, very small camp. They would say, you know, when we will win the war, we will cut your throat. You can imagine a little girl. We didn't know anything about the war. There was no radio, no newspaper, no news. So we didn't know. They were losing at a certain moment, but they were saying that they were winning, you see. So we didn't know. We were living in a terror, specifically for a child, because I was thinking, every evening I went to bed thinking, oh, I'm still alive, but tomorrow we can be all dead, you see. That was, well, it has been a very, very strong experience in my life. Then, luckily, the war finished. And, well, I have to say about my father, la storia del dito, la racconto?
Ho la domanda su
Okay,
quello, aspetta.
okay. Is enough? Okay. Well, no, you said something else that you wanted
Well,
to.
just how have the Japanese received this book in translation?
Well, you know, it has been very important for me that I learned in the camp that all the people around the camp, for example, the peasants who were there, they were with us. They didn't think that we were enemies. That was a wonderful experience, because that permitted me to be always, and even now, friend of the Japanese people. I have a lot of friends there. I have been 3 months ago, I was there because they published a book. By the way, this book. And so it was important for me to distinguish between the guards, who were absolutely sadistic. They were very, very sadistic. I made an example. For example, they were the letters coming from Italy, no? And my father, for example, had the mother who was ill. And so he was very anxious to know about his mother. And the letter came. So they will put the letter on the table, and they will say, wait a week, then we will give you the letter. So we were there waiting for the letter, looking all the day the letters. In the day of the week decided before, they will call us, and they will, come si dice, strappare, rip all the letters in front of us, you see. But this is sadistic, no? Because, I mean, what the danger of a letter, there was not, and specifically because they could read them, etc. But this was the way for them to treat us. This is the camp.
Dacia, ma il libro come è stato ricevuto?
No, ancora non è uscito, perché è uscito adesso. In these days,
Okay.
the book have been just published, so I don't know the reaction because it just came out. But I say in the book that I love the Japanese people, I love the Japanese culture, and that the concentration camp was an experience very limited. And you know what I learned? That when somebody has a complete power that, complete power. That means that the other person can't do anything, can't react, because you are in the hand of a person. For example, they will say, if you says anything, protest or anything, they will say, tomorrow, no rice, which was dead, which was like dying, because for us, even the grain of rice was important, you see. So we were always, we had blackmail of these guards about food. This was the problem. And that, I think that it happens. No, I mean that when you have the power, the absolute power on somebody else, you could become sadistic. I learned it there, but I found it in other situations, even in peacetime, that when you have real, like for example, I made a campaign on the people who were living in mental asylum, no? And for example, they had no power. They were completely in hands of come si chiamano, infermieri.
Nurses and doctors.
And the nurses, sometimes they were absolutely sadistic, you see. So I think that we should avoid to give a great power, a complete power. We should take care, because the complete power can take out of us something which maybe is human, but usually we refrain it. We try, they try to hide or to control.
I'd like to call one of our students, who either Bridget or Olivia, one of the two, who can read the first translation they made, so that you get a taste of.
She read a lot of books. You told me that you like to read books.
Yeah, this was one of my favorites so far. Everything started one morning in my mother's arms inside a silent car, glimpsing through the clouded car windows the lamps as they went by. Light, dark, light, dark. It was the world that made itself real in front of my astonished eyes, with its calm and powerful cadence. While the alternating light-dark left me a little agitated, I smelled the scent that accompanied my mother, the fragrance of lily of the valley and that Japanese mint soap. It was the warmth of a friendly body that I thought would always stay as is, while my eyes framed a world, a rapid passing between lightness and darkness. I learned then, all too early, that the shadow could have prevailed over the light and kept me imprisoned in a persistent darkness. Only after many years, I made the connections between the various moments of that day, aided by the stories told by my parents. We were in Japan. I was about to turn 7. We were happily integrated into the intricately interwoven connections that was Japanese culture. I spoke the Kyoto dialect perfectly. My father taught at the Japanese university. My mother participated in regular student anti-war gatherings. The dream was peace. We thought that the war would soon be over and that we would return to Italy. My father was anxious to rejoin his mother, the fearless Yoi, after years of distance and letters, both affectionate and anxious. My mother dreamed of embracing her father, Nono Enrico. We didn't know that the war had 2 long years to go, and that the worst had yet to come for the Japanese, for the poor inhabitants of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, for the small Mariani family composed of the father, Fosco, and the mother, Topazio, and the 3 children, Daicha, born in Florence, Yuki and Tony, born 2 years apart in a foreign land. Tony, or Antonella, would have been called Kiku, chrysanthemum, but the Italian authority in Japan refused to register a foreign name for an Italian child, even though she was born in Tokyo. Yuki, recorded as Luisa, per the wishes of the Italian government, remained our little Neve, born in the white of Sapporo in the cold region of Hokkaido. No one could have foreseen that such a sweet, blonde girl with slightly sad eyes would die too early from a bone disease.
Grazie.
Excellent translation and excellent reading, Bridget. Great job. question, Dacia. Do you have one or? Okay. So, Dacia, so you talk both about your father and your mother in very, very warm terms. Clearly, you have a lot of admiration for both of them, especially during this time. But I was curious if you can tell us more about your mother. She was the only woman in the camp. Everybody else were men. So can you tell us how your mother also handled three young children, the only woman for about 2 years in this camp, with very little food, very little contacts with the outside world, if any?
No, any. No, well, she was very courageous, I must say. You know, she was a sort of woman who'd say, when there was a danger or something, suffering, she would say, what we can do. I mean, she wanted always to confront the situation. And I learned this has been very important. She never surrendered. Surrender, never. And I think this is very important because, you know, really, there were moments in which we wanted to die because when you don't eat, you start to be ill. And all the parasites, for example, they come on you inside, outside. And then the danger of the bombs, and then the earthquakes also, because there were also the earthquakes. And she never said, she never lamented, she never protested. She was always saying what we can do. No? And for example, when she was paralyzed with the legs, at a certain moment she was sitting all the time on the floor. And she decided to sew the socks of the guards just to have, for example, potato, you see. So she was so feeble that she couldn't even take the
needle and the thread
in her hands. But she would force herself and go on looking like this because the eyes couldn't see anymore. And but she would do it because try always to survive. No, it's an art. To survive. It's very difficult. And but she was the strong person who gave us the possibility, the desire of surviving. And I think this has been for me an example. You know, many people of the family would say, but you are mad. You can't go in a concentration camp with 3 children. No, they were absolutely against her decision. But she went on and she was stubborn and she said, no, I am against the fascism. I am against racism specifically. They were not
racism.
Racism. They were not. They were not in political parties, but they were absolutely against racism. And so they decided, even if they knew that they were going in a concentration camp, you see. And I think, for me, they have been a great example, even if many persons in the family didn't agree with us, with my father and my mother.
I mean, based on the history, it was certainly a very good choice of your family, especially with the bombings. By the time you hit 1943, a lot of the children in the Japanese orphanages were being sent out of the country, out into the countryside, because there was not enough food in the cities and in Nagoya. So it certainly would have resulted in even further removal and perhaps your separation from your siblings. You know, you spoke a little bit about the persistence and the power of your mother in these difficult times. I was reading a Mainichi Shimbun article about your book, as they are reporting on it. They're excited that it's now translated. And one of the parts that they spoke about that I think also I spoke a little bit to Gabriella Romani about as well is your father and the role your father played, particularly with his understanding of Japanese society, particularly his notion of moral obligation, which the Japanese call giri. One of the things that happens, a memorable point in the book, spoilers, uh, is that you talk about your father cutting off one of his fingers with an axe in front of a Japanese guard as a form of protest against the living conditions that you were undergoing, and the reaction then of the guards. I was wondering if you could speak a little more about the power of knowledge and your father's understanding of Japanese society and how that may have helped or hindered you in the camp.
Yes. Well, first I must say that the majority of the people of the camp, which was very small, as I said, they were intellectuals, people who were learning and studying Japanese culture, you see. There were also a priest. There was also a priest, but they were more or less professors, so they knew very well Japanese culture. And my father, he knew very well. So usually he would say, every day he was saying, but the children are not political prisoners. You can't treat the children as political prisoners, because they are children. They didn't choose. And they will say, oh, you are Italians, you are coward, you are traitors. You know, they were insulting us every day. So one day my father got angry because the chief of the Kazuya was his name. He became a very aggressive Kazuya. And my father got angry and said, we are not traitors, we are not coward, we just think in another way. But the others continued to insult him. So he took this axe and he cut this finger on where we were cutting the wood for the fire. And I remember as something terrible because, you know, he was dressed in white and all the blood went on him. So he got, for the moment, he got angry and terrible. He started to shout. And then he had the sword, la spada. He took, because they were going always with the sword. And he put it against my father. So I said, oh, he's going to kill him, you know. But he didn't. And this is called yubikiri, is a name. You know, harakiri, everybody knows what it is. Yubikiri is the cutting of the finger. So it's not something that came from the fantasy of my father. It is a tradition of the samurai culture, tradition, that if you cut your finger and you throw it against the enemy, you give him an obligation. And then he can't say that you are a coward, for example, because you made an example of courage, you see?
A coward. Mm-hmm.
Coward, see. So, well, that day, everything was terrible, terrible. But after a week, this Kazuya came to us and he brought a little goat, you see? So the thing functioned. Sometime anthropology could be useful. That's true. So he was surprised himself. But so he came, they said, he changed completely his attitude. And he gave that this, oh, you know that the goat makes a milk which is very protein. And so he, in a way, he saved our life because we had, it was already after 1 year and a half. But anyway, we were like a skeleton and we were all ill, and this milk made us feel better and gave us a little, even not much, but little protein. You see, this, then my father had been very courageous because he could die of, how do you say, when you... Hemorrhage.
Cancrena. Mm-hmm.
No, cancrena, no. Hemorrhagia.
Hemorrhage.
Hemorrhage. Yes, because he was losing a lot of blood and there was nothing there. There were no doctors. And we took a handkerchief, tried to push, to stop the blood. Anyway, this was, yes, so many adventures. But I must say something that is also a sort of contradiction, very interesting. Well, one day in the morning, we woke up, there was nobody. The guards were not there. So we were very surprised because we didn't know that the war was finished, but we didn't know. There were no radio, nothing. So we sent one of us to the peasant to ask what happened. And he said, they said the war is finished. So he came to the camp jumping like a kangaroo saying, oh, la guerra è finita, la guerra è finita. He was so happy, we embraced, we were happy, we were jumping. Well, but in the afternoon, we saw a group of Japanese peasants coming to the camp. There were 30 persons, more or less. And we were a little more, un po' inquieti, come si dice?
Anxious.
Anxious, because we didn't know what they want. But they stopped there, very kind, very gentle. And a man came and said, the emperor said that the war is finished, that we surrendered.
Mm-hmm.
But the emperor continued, and he said a lot of other things, but in ancient Japanese. We didn't understand. So we ask you, that was the incredible thing, we ask you to explain what the emperor said, because they didn't know that these Italians were scholars, you see. And it was incredible that all these Japanese came to the Italian prisoners to ask what the emperor said in ancient Japanese, which for us was incredible. But I think that this has been a very important, paradoxal, but very important moment for us. We felt that we had something in common, and that at the end, the culture is important.
Yeah, I actually, from the library, it will be going back, so you also can check it out, the book by your father, which is Meeting with Japan. And in it, he describes that, not quite as colorfully and animatedly, more as a scholar does, but he talks about when the emperor surrendered, he does so in a dialect that is pretty much incomprehensible to any modern Japanese person, let alone the scholars have a chance, because I can read some imperial edicts, but if I give them to my Japanese friends, they cannot read them at all. But it's just because I was trained in that language too. But it is one of those moments where so many people had been told so often, we're going to win the war, we're going to win the war, that having the emperor, who never spoke in public, the emperor only communicated through writings that were then read by others. It was a true shock to the system. And again, knowledge being power. The peasants in the area knew the people who could understand it.
Yeah.
Were you guys?
Yes, that was a very strange combination.
I'd like now to call Olivia to do the second reading. So the reading was kind of random from the beginning. It was not, face in our conversation.
Non correre, vai
but,
piano, non
oh.
Thank you. Someday after September 8th, 1943, my parents were called by the Japanese authorities. A taxi ride. The expectation of a socio-political lecture from the authorities. Instead, while I remained in the arms of an employee with white hair and black apron, Fosco and Tapazia were closed in 2 different offices and interrogated on their choices regarding the pact that the Japanese had just made with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Whoever chose to stay with the Republic of Salo had to swear their loyalty to the Nazi fascist government. Their request was to decide quickly between sides. If they didn't sign and pledge their allegiance, their destiny was to be in a concentration camp for treason of the fatherland. The 2 parents, faithful to their own ideas, decided not to sign without even having to consult each other. My mother repeated to me many times in the years to come that they had decided separately. She wanted it to be known that her decision was made independently and not influenced by her husband. It was not a political choice. Neither of the 2 belonged to any party. The one thing that united them, though, was rejecting racism. That an anthropologist would react like this is understandable, but from the view of a Sicilian girl, A daughter of a duke, raised in Bagheria, maybe less so. But if one knew just a little of Nono Enrico Aliata, it would be clear where the free spirit of a little blonde girl in love with life and with truth came from. Nono Enrico was an aristocrat who paid no attention to aristocracy, who worked at a vineyard with his farmers, who read books of philosophy and history and was very worried for what was happening in the 30s because he had read Tolstoy, Tacitus, and Plato, because he had read Krishnamurti and the ideas of peace and intellectual freedom. In conclusion, a man of restless mind who had clear ideas of democratic conduct, though not adhering to a precise ideology. The very kind Japanese police, in response to the negative reply of my parents, quickly became rude and scornful. They were filled with national ideology, with conservative vision and the authority of the state. They were particularly impolite towards my mother. They expected to see her tears of repentance, declarations of maternal love, a humble request of pity for her and her children. Instead, they found themselves in front of a proud, decisive woman who claimed her own freedom of thought. Not terroristic thought, but decidedly part of the resistance against the social and political arrogance, against the contempt of the ideas and rights of the citizens.
Thank you.
Excellent job, Olivia, in translating and reading.
Grazie, Olivia.
What I'm curious, and I wonder, Dacia, how you think of it. You have a lot of admiration for your dad and for your mom. You are trying to remember that moment as a child. In the book, you talk about the games that your parents did with you, children, to trying to keep your mind away. So how do you shield children from horrific reality? How do we translate? Because we need to speak in tell in a different language. And that is during wartime, but this can be, in our time. How do we protect, but also speak to our children about the moment we're living? So can you tell us about, seems your parents were very careful and very thoughtful about this whole process.
Well, first of all, I should go to school. I should have been going to school because I was now after 7 and then 8 years old. And, but there were no books, there were nothing. So this had been very important also. My father and my mother, in this courtyard, under a tree, they will teach me. My father was teaching me mathematics, geography, history. My mother was telling me stories, more about literature. My mother was a wonderful storyteller. No? She had a good memory, and she was telling me stories of not only historical things, but also fables and books. And one of these books that have been very important for me was Pinocchio. But Pinocchio is a very important book because, the idea is the Pinocchio is that is made, this character is made just because he's a liar. No? And when he tells lies, the nose grows. But there are many other themes inside. For example, one thing that I think is very important is the relation between father and child. Because, the child, this man start to construct this puppet. But when he arrived to the leg, the first thing that the puppet does is to kick on the father. So you understand that there is a relation of conflictual relation between father and son. And they go on, and Pinocchio is full of adventures. He wants to go out, he doesn't want to stay at home, he doesn't want to be poor, etc., etc. And, but the father is very sweet. He accepts everything because he loves his child. and he follows always everywhere. But at the end, this is the interesting thing. There are no women in Pinocchio, no? The only is
La fatina.
come si chiama la fata?
The ferry.
Ferry.
Yeah, the ferry thing.
Ferry, basta così, ferry. Well, when he goes to knock at the door of the ferry, ask him to save him, she opened the windows and she says, I'm dead, I can't do anything. So the woman doesn't exist as a person. But the man has the quality of a woman to be very, very sweet, very paternal, very kind, very protective. And I think very intelligent thing was that in the end they meet and they come si dice, riconciliare, reconcile, and they understand that they love each other in a womb of a whale, but it is a womb of a female. This is very interesting. So at the end, no, they meet in the womb. So symbolically, I think it's very important. At the end, it comes out the mother. But this father is in the same time mother and father. And this, I think, is something very also actual today, no? Because we believe that a mother should be in a certain way, the father in another way. But today there is a revolution about the functions of the gender, no? We don't believe anymore that the mother should only take care of the children. On the other side, the man should go to war and make professions, but not, now we are changing everything. So he was very, how can I say, anticipator, can you say that?
Ahead of his time. Ahead of his time.
Ahead of his time, yes. Because he understood certain things and he was very, very clever. You know that it is the Italian book which is more translated in all the world, Pinocchio. You didn't know? You didn't?
I didn't.
You don't. I can tell you. That's very interesting. And because I think there are many themes inside which are psychologically important, even now, very, very actual.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would expect Dante would win, but I guess not. There we go. So, I mean, speaking of authors and things that have had influence on you, I have heard that you were a great admirer of Tanizaki Junichiro, who is probably one of the most famous Japanese authors. He wrote the book Naomi in the 1930s, which kind of was, or the 20s, which kind of was this epitome of the modern girl. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how Japanese writing and style and authors influence you as an author yourself.
Well, I was very small, but certainly the storytelling, Japanese storytelling had been important. Maybe more the theater, because you know that the Japanese theater is all made of a dialogue between dead and living persons, which is very interesting. I mean, the traditional, the no theater. The kabuki, no, is very different. Kabuki is a whole social relation between persons today, the day of the authors. But the no theater, which is wonderful, I like it very much, which is made with music like an opera, is really a dialogue between dead and living person. But you know, we Occidental, we have an idea that the dead are dangerous, that the dead are horrible, that we have to escape because sometimes they are vampire. No, in the literature today, in the film, the dead people are vampire. But in the Japanese culture, the dead people are, on the contrary, they are wise, they are nice, they can teach the living people to live better, to be more wise. They have they give very intelligent suggestions. So the relation is completely different. You agree with that?
I'm actually currently teaching a class on Japanese medieval monsters, and we're reading some of the no plays, which are all about ghosts. And
That's right.
ghosts, the living and the
Yes.
dead live together. They complete each
Yes,
other.
that's correct. And the living people, they never have, they are not afraid of the dead people at all. On the contrary, the dead people come to give a good suggestion to the living people. And they love, and they are intelligent, and they understand the living people, which for me has been very important, because, you know, I write also for the theater, and I often write about that person who are in relation with a living person, but nothing to do with the fear, with the hate, with the yeah, it's a good relation, which I think is something good. Well, you know, in the traditional, I mean, I speak about Italy because I know better, but all the Occidental world is like that. In the originally, in the peasant culture, there was a relation, a much better relation between the dead and the living person. For example, when in the peasant society, a person was dying, all the family, but also the friends were going around the bed. They will assist to the death of a person. And it was a sort of ritual, society ritual. And also the children were there. They would understand what is passing from the life to the... And it was something very important. And not so... I mean, today, I think that we have a very bad relation with death. I mean, you are in a hospital, you are closed behind the shadow, window, no, come si chiama?
A curtain.
Curtain, and you are alone. And it's terrible. And even in the language, we never speak about death. We say, he's gone, he's under, now in Italiano si dice, è andato via, in una migliore vita, etc., etc. So I think that this, we could take something from the Japanese culture. You agree with me? No, yeah, there are certain things.
I'm biased, but I agree.
No, I mean, there are certain things that we could take. Naturally, they have their, come si dice, bad defects. But for this kind of things, I think that we could take something from them. For example, also the idea of community. The Japanese people have a sense of the community. I mean, a person is less important than the community. He feels that he belongs, first of all, to the community. No? That's true. In Italy, for example, it's esattamente il contrario. The contrary. The person is much more important than community, which I think that we should take something from Japan and give something to the Japanese. Okay.
Okay. I'd like to call now either Andrei or Aurora want to come and read another excerpt. Aurora.
Aurora, non correre. No, they read.
Okay.
Vai piano.
One day, towards the end of October, my father writes, at 8 in the morning, the sound of muscular footsteps was heard in the hall of the house. It was Mr. Iwami, head deputy of the Foreigner Office section of Kyoto Prefecture, accompanied by 6 or 7 men in uniforms with an conciliatory look. Iwami and his companions sit down in the living room and appear friendly and kind. Do you like Brahms? The policeman asks Fosco. He replies that, of course, he knows and loves Brahms. But he says it a little disconcerted. What do these policemen come to do in their house? And why do they talk about music? You know Beethoven, certainly, and you know the Sixth Symphony. the chief deputy continues seraphically. My father responds kindly, but he is dumbfounded. He doesn't understand what the musical display means. Did they come in a group of 7, cloaked in shiny uniforms, to talk about Beethoven and Brahms? Meanwhile, the governess had left the kitchen to bring a few cups of green tea and some mochi, Japanese sweets made with rice flour and soy puree. Sweets that the agents ate, scarfing down the entire tray. Finally, the chief deputy, after waiting until all the agents had finished their tea and their mochi, as Fosco writes in his autobiography, stood up, not suddenly, but firmly, and sternly pronounced these words: "Stand up, traitors." And Fosco, who knew the linguistic hierarchies of Japanese well, noted that in a few seconds, the gendarme, what was that? Gendarme, thank you, had switched from the polite voi to the tu, the kimi used with inferiors. From this moment, you are no longer under the authority of your embassy. To the Japanese, foreigners are always under the authority of their embassies, as we no longer recognize your government. From now on, you are under the authority of the Imperial Government of Japan. You must take orders from us only. Prepare to leave with your children and the bare minimum amount of luggage. Then he turned to his companions and ordered, "All of you, stay here and guard them. These are our enemies."
Thank you.
Laura. Excellent
Grazie.
job translating and reading. After the war, years later, you and your father went back looking for the building, the 2-story building next to this tennis court that was your prisoners' camp. Can you tell us a little more of that? What was your impression being back? What did you find? And did you get to talk to people there?
Well, as I said, one morning the guard disappeared, so we understood that the war finished. But the planes, the American planes, were going up and down, but they couldn't see us because the camp was very small. So my mother, as usual, she was always have good ideas. She made a flag, an Italian flag, but very big one, with tomatoes, etc., because she had no colors. And she put the flag on a hill. And so, for the first time, these planes found us. And they came the day after with some, come si chiamano, bidoni, containers, but enormous, for 200 people. And they throw them on the hill, which was full of stones. And so these containers broke, and it was incredible because there was Coca-Cola going down. There was on the other side chocolate going down on the other side. There was Pall Mall going fluid in the air. There was it was incredible because, you know, but I remember my father saying, don't eat, because you know that when the stomach is you can't eat, it's dangerous, you can die. So we had to learn piece by piece, very small, eating every day, a very small part of them. But then we stayed there a long time before they came to take us. Then the Americans came. And I must say, I have this memory that they were the angels, you know, the angels liberating us. It was something, these young Japanese, blonde hair, taking chewing gum, chocolate, for us have been wonderful. But I remember that a doctor that visited me, because, you know, we were, as I said, like a skeleton. I remember one thing that surprised me. This American doctor said, this child has a heart like an eggplant. I said, eggplant? How is it possible? Well, you know, when you are very hungry, the heart become swelling and also become, because there's no oxygen enough, to become dark. but they cured us, I must say, very, very, very. I have a wonderful memory. I have to say I have a gratitude to the Japanese soldiers, even then after I think they made some mistakes, but then another thing. But for that moment, well, you know, they have been, they have destroyed the SS, the German Nazis, and so they were heroes. For us, they were heroes. Maybe afterward they made enormous quantity of errors. I think so. I remember fighting when I was a young girl for the Vietnam War, for example. I think it has been a mistake. But in that moment, it was really wonderful because they were so full of enthusiasm. So, you know, we were thinking that we could change the world, that the world could be in peace forever. And well, things that have changed, have passed, and this is a very bad moment.
I just want to connect for a second to what you were saying about the state of hunger, which is really difficult to understand. You know, for any of us who live our normal lives where we have food, in fact, we tend to eat too much. Even when we try to get on a diet, get in shape, I don't know, for the summer, to go to Italy because you want to look good when you go back and all that. But still, I think we have no idea what it means not having food there for you. In the book, you mentioned there you reference Clare of Assisi, who was a nun who from Assisi, who made a vow of not eating, and she made a vow to poverty in the Middle Ages in the 1200s. And you wrote a book about her too, In Praise of Disobedience, Clare of Assisi. But you use her also as this image, this figure. She chose not to eat. That was not your choice or your family choice.
No.
So can you tell her, you know, what Clare represents here in terms of the feeling of being hungry, whether you choose it or not?
Well, but the difference is just in this situation, if you choose not to eat, it's something very important. I mean, for example, I believe that the, come si chiama, anoressia, the anorexia,
Anorexia.
for example, is a sort of desire of spirituality, you know, because when I read about all these mystics in the medieval period, they were many of them, the mystics were not eating. They decide not to eat, but because they want to be near to Christ, you know, for example. But it was a form of spirituality, a great spirituality. Well, I think that today, those who refuse food, they never think about spirituality, but I think that behind, if you go deep inside themselves, you can find a desire of spirituality. Well, this is my interpretation. I could be wrong, but I think that because I feel that there is something desperate, something very profound, the refusal of our culture of consummation and money.
Consumerism.
Consumerism. And this idea that we have to only to have money and propriety, no? And the spirituality is gone. We really don't have anymore any idea of spirituality. And so it is like as if they say, I want to die because I don't like this life, but I don't want to die completely. It's a sort of dying half and half. But they are very sad, desperate. we didn't choose, so it was our relation with food was completely different. Another thing that I learned is that when you really need something, you need and desire something, you make a mythology. So the food for us was a myth, a mythology. We made a mythology of food. And so I think that when you lack something, when you need something desperately, as spirituality or sexuality, you make it a mythology. The mythology comes from the lack of something that you desire absolutely. We were in the camp, we were playing with the stones. And for example, with my sisters, I will come with a stone and I will say, I give you some bread. But you couldn't eat stones. But it was, in that moment, it was a piece of bread, you see. And then I would say, this is a fruit, is an apple, which was another stone. But this is mythology. It's the changing of the reality in something that you imagine. And we were speaking all the time about how to cook things, how to eat things, etc. And even now, if I go and in front of a shop of food, I could stay half an hour looking, because it's like a great imagination. It's like something beautiful that you have to look at, not to eat, because I don't eat much. I'm not eating, but the idea of the food, which becomes a desire and something absolutely like heaven. This is what I learned. And, and I think that usually when the mythology comes from the desire of something that we need, no? Don't you agree with this? And religion for me is a sort of mythology of desire, of spirituality. The Pope, for example, in these days, speak about going back to have a desire for spirituality. Unfortunately, there are many people who don't agree, don't participate to this idea of spirituality, which I think is the thing that lacks in this moment. Don't you think so?
Andrei, are you here? I don't see you. Yes, okay.
Ah, lui, già lo conosco. Ciao, Andrei.
So why don't you start from I still remember and then finish it.
Hi, everyone. Well, I still remember the wind blowing in our faces as we were riding in the truck that took us to the concentration camp. What would have become of us? The Japanese government was courteous, even though being called. It has promised that, according to the international regulations, we would have food and sleep. Modest, but enough to prevent us from suffering, especially girls so little as us. And in fact, as soon as we arrived at the camp, we saw vans that were loaded with bags of rice, vegetables, eggs, and milk arriving, which we thought, and not wrongly, according to the Japanese government, were intended for us, prisoners. Nevertheless, we discovered very soon that all the food was confiscated by the guards, who took it home or resold it on the black market, leaving only a little of rice for us, just to keep us alive. But in what conditions? Arriving at the Timpaku camp, which was located on the outskirts of Nagoya, we immediately saw that they had adapted the changing rooms of a tennis court, which had evidently not been used for some time, with a square next to it smoothed and protected by metal nets, which carried the traces of some light red sand. Barbed wires, a 2-story building, 3 rooms in which we had to cram together in 19 people in total. They were not rooms fitted for sleeping in, and in fact, we slept very badly, exposed to the heat in the summer and the harsh cold in the winter. We would lie on the floor, on a futon tossed on a dirty and lousy tatami, wearing a military blanket, which after a few months was infested with fleas and lice. We often sat one behind the other to crush the shirami, the fleas that left on us painful papules, which became infected when scratched. But the more weight we lost, the weaker we became, and the more invasive and reckless the parasites became. I remember certain worms that made my bottom itch and my nose bleed all the time. The small hemorrhages were due to beriberi, a disease caused by the lack of vitamin B, which weakened the entire family. Extreme weakness, leg cramps, bleeding gums, joint pain, intestinal disorders, insomnia, edema of the lower limbs, cardiopathy, hair loss. To keep warm and also to tame our hunger, we slept hugging, like a family of monkeys on a stripped tree.
Bravo, bravissimo.
Excellent job. Excellent job.
I mean, you know, what we just heard there, we see kind of the kind of deprivations and the challenges you had. You know, you had lived in Japan, you spoke the language fluently as a child. You studied as an adult Japanese bunka and lekshi, history and culture. How would you say that the culture shaped you? In particular, at the end of the book, at least according to Professor Romani's translation, she translates as this. Quote, books made me European for cultural sensibility, values, and knowledge. Italian for the language I use. Japan remains, however, at the bottom of all this. With my first happy experiences and later the horrors connected with the war and the concentration camp. Many think I should hate the country that wished me dead, but it's not like that at all. I love Japan and the Japanese people because even during the imprisonment, I met kindness, generosity, and the solidarity of the common people, even though I suffered because of the sadism, the nationalistic craziness, and racist disdain of the guards. So I was kind of curious, what role does Japan play in your life today?
Well, you know, the only person who came to the camp with some food was a Japanese woman. All our friends, Italian friends, disappeared. You know, it was dangerous. She had been beaten for that. The food had been thrown, and she had been chased. She couldn't see us, but she came. You understand? Well, these things are very important. And as I said before, as I was a child, sometime I could go out from the camp, hiding myself naturally, because it was forbidden, and I would go and work with the peasants for 1 hour or 2 hours, and then they give me a potato, for example, or some rice, and I was hiding and bringing in the camp and divide, because this was the rule. Everything should be divided in 5 parts, all the family, and if something more, it was divided all together with the, the community. But this, for me, it was clear that the Japanese people were not against us. Absolutely, we were not the enemies. They had pity for us, specifically for the children. So, for example, the peasant, when I was working with us, they should have denounced us because it was forbidden. Absolutely, they risked, but they didn't. So, for me, it was important to learn that there was a great difference between the Japanese people and the guards. You see, this is what I learned. And then, for example, sometime they would, for example, let a mouse to come in the camp. And so we jump on the mouse naturally. Poor mouse, poverino, poverino. But when you are absolutely hungry, you eat everything. And but I don't suggest you to eat mouse. They are horrible. They smell bad. I think maybe because they're underground, I don't know, but they are horrible. but we could eat anything, any kind of thing. You know, for example, they were sadistic, as I said. They will stay on the balcony, they will eat, happy to see that we are looking at them, like eating wonderful things. Then, for example, at a certain moment, they will throw on the floor a head of a fish or a fruit, come si dice, macho, rotten piece of and we jumped there because we were hungry. You know what we did with come si chiama, lo scheletro del pesce?
The bones of the fish?
The bones of the fish. If you put it in the water and you boil it for hours, something comes out which you can drink, and there is a little protein, you see, but horrible, naturally. But we did anything we could eat. No, it was you become you have a great imagination, and we could eat, and we tried everything, anything that was there. I was eating ants, formiche, but my father was angry because the ants. If you eat 2 ants, nothing happens, but you eat 30 ants, there is a poison inside. Come si chiama? L'acido formico, acido formico. I don't know in English how is it. It's a poison that the ant have in a small amount, but if you eat them. But I was so hungry, I could eat anything I could eat. So, you know, hunger, I think that we Occidental people, we don't know hunger. Appetite, yes, but no hunger. Hunger is something different. Is when you really lack of protein, vitamin, and you start to be ill. You can die of hunger. And this, for me, has been the most terrible experience of my life.
Dacia, one last question to close this panel, and then we'll open. I'm sure there will be some questions from the audience, but I'm not outing you since the information is very public. You'll find it anywhere. But on November 13th, Dacia turned 88. And every year she comes to the United States and tours several American universities. This year she's been at Harvard and Boston University, now here, and then she's going back to UMass, and then Saturday she's going to go back to Italy. So a scholar called you an ethical nomad. And you wrote that as soon as you return from a trip, you start planning the next one. So how does travel define you and your vision of life, especially given all the adventures you've been through as a child? It's quite remarkable, I think.
Well, I was used because at 1 year old I was on the ship for Japan. So, well, but I must say that in my family there's a tradition of great traveling. I mean, my grandmother, which was English, she was a writer. And she was very courageous because, you know, at the beginning of the century, of 20th century, she was traveling alone, just with a rucksack and without money, because she was not rich, but she was going around with the train, with the bus, and she was going all the Orient. So she was a very, how can I say, courageous woman. Then my father, I think, took from her, and he also always going around, first of all in Japan, but before Japan he was been in Tibet. So he wrote a book of Tibet. So, I mean, maybe there is something in my blood, I mean, heritage of the love of traveling. But for me, traveling is not tourism. I think the tourism can be terrible because, you know, you go in a place, you go only to see something, and then you try to stay in a hotel where the food is always the same, international food. Then you then you stay with the other people who is the same of you in the same country, you speak your own language, you don't never see and speak and encounter other people of the country. So for me, traveling is a way of the practice of knowledge, something different. If I go in a place, a new place, which I don't know, I try to meet the people of the place, read the books that have been written in the place, not the guides, but the books, the novels, the poems, etc. There is always something that can be written, read. And so now, at the beginning, it was just going around to understand. Now I go around also because they invite me. Luckily, I can put together my work and my pleasure. So, for example, I went to Vietnam because they translated the book of mine. And in Vietnam, there are no Italians. I mean, here you have an Italian community, no? In all the states, there is a great, because Italy have immigration, a lot of immigrants. Well, in Vietnam, no Italians. So I asked, there was a class like this, full of Vietnamese who were learning Italian. So I said, why do we learn Italian? I was curious, I couldn't understand. And a small girl with, come si chiamano le trecce?
Braids.
Braids. She stand up and say, because your language is beautiful. I said, that's wonderful. And well, it's true that the Italian language is not the more spoken because English, French, Spanish, etc. But it is the fourth language more learned, read, because we have because it's a beautiful language, and also because the music, for example, the opera, which the opera in a way is our great novels of the 19th century. Yes, because the Italian language was not written, it was a spoken language. Even, this is a long story, but Italy has been the first place where from the Latin we have changed to Italian, to Volga, it was called Volgare. And Dante, which is the 13th century, started to write in Volgare. Then all the others, poets, Ariosto, Boccaccio. But then what happened? With the reform, the church made a counter-reform. That had been, for the language, something terrible, because the church, which was the totalitarian church, decided that all the knowledge had to be made in Latin. So we went back to Latin. You see, that's why we didn't have a great novel literature in the 19th century, because we had gone back to Latin in the school, in the church, in the tribunal. They were speaking Latin. And you know that Galileo Galilei wrote a book called Delle cose che galleggiano sull'acqua, things that float on the water. Okay, in Italian, in Volgare. And you know that he has been accused of lese humanitatis in Latin, that means offending humanity, you see, not only from the church, but also from the scientific society. You can understand that? That means that we have gone back to Latin, and that naturally has been a loss for the Italian language. That came out much later. And as the Italian language was only spoken and not written, because it was a dialect, we had the Italian language, we had it in the opera. So the opera is the literature of the 19th century. And you know, today also, for example, Bellini, Verdi, they are the opera of all the world, and they are in Italian, So the Italian language has passed through the opera.
Thank you, Dacia, very much. And thank you, Professor, for this wonderful, thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being, we have a reception waiting for us there, but let's please, if you have any comments, questions, Professor Chu.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hunger was the absolute overriding theme. What I was surprised about it, you said that there was actually food for your camp and the guards took it. I always thought that this was a kind of Japanese policy or perhaps a shortage that they themselves had. So what, and the situation maybe was very different in Indonesia than in.
Well, certainly there was a difference, but in a way, there was a shortage, but they gave, for us, those, it was not so much for 18 persons, but for us, seeing that there were some eggs coming that we never saw at our table, you see, you understand, it was the dream of something to eat. They were selling these things, the guards, they were selling, or they were eating themselves, they were stealing. They were stealing everything that came to the camp, which was not much. But for us, it was much because we were looking with desire to the thing that they were coming to the camp. But they left us only, as I said, like this, of rice. That's all, you see. That's why maybe it was not so much for the 18 persons, but for us it was. But anyway, the Japanese government said that we couldn't die of hunger. They gave us something anyway, but this something was completely disappeared as it arrived, disappeared, because they were, I think, or eating themselves or selling, I don't know, but both of them, maybe, both of them.
I also could say with that there has been studies of the Japanese children before and after the war, and the average height of Japanese children themselves went down by over 20% because of malnutrition in the Japanese population. So I think that it's absolutely true that there was food put aside by the government for those in the camps, but it also was a widespread problem, which of course makes the market for resale even stronger. And I lived in Jakarta, and I've been to some of the camps, particularly in Sumatra, and in Southeast Asia, it was even more exacerbated. And in particular, they have pictures even of Japanese soldiers in Southeast Asia that after liberation, they look like they're coming from concentration camps because the soldiers themselves were starving to death. So I think it's a combination of both.
So, okay, student in the back. Mm-hmm.
Have you revisited the camps that you were at, and if you did, how did that affect you and your writing in the book?
Sei tornata nel campo?
Yes, I went there. The camp doesn't exist anymore. There's nothing. There's nothing there. The people living there now, because they're new houses, they even don't know anything about the camp. They didn't even know that there was a camp. That's strange. Well, they wanted to forget, I think. I don't know. I was there. And what is the other, che diceva?
Che tipo di, cioè, ritornare, che impressione, che impatto ha avuto anche su di te?
Well, for me, the most impressive thing was the camp doesn't exist, so it was all on my memory. But what I find sweet was when I went to Hokkaido, which is the north where we have been at the beginning. Then there, the house where we have lived, which was the house of the university where my father was teaching, well, that was very moving for me because, I found the place where I was playing and I found the atmosphere, the wonderful places. And that was, for me, I've been there 3 months ago. So, and I found the people so nice, so friendly, so, I found, and some of them were old and they remember. And they were very, very happy to see. And you know that my father died, a few years ago, and they had made a tomb, which he's established. His tomb is in Florence, but they did another tomb there to remember him. So it was very moving for me. The camp finished; doesn't exist anymore.
Any other?
No, there were no family. The only family is our family. Yes. So they were grown-up people, and they all died. They all died. They are the children of these people, yes. Some of them, many of them didn't have children. Many of them remain in Japan. And some of them, yes, we were in contact, and specifically with the next generation, because the other were old. I mean, I was a child, so there are how many? 70 years that we passed.
Questions or comments? Then I suggest that we speak more informally with some food and drinks. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Dr.
Thank you, both of them. Thank you.